There's a lot of parts and pieces. That is how Jeff Gordon described the situation surrounding Chase Elliott and the number 9 Chevrolet. He then named where those parts and pieces are coming from. Not from the driver, not from Rick Hendrick, from partners. In one sentence, on a SiriusXM NASCAR Radio appearance, the vice chairman of Hendrick Motorsports identified the actual obstacle holding up the biggest contract in the organization, and it is a name that never appears on the entry list. If you follow NASCAR contract news closely, subscribe to the channel so these updates reach you first. Leave a comment below telling us whether you believe Chase Elliott finishes his career at Hendrick Motorsports. To understand why that single sentence carries weight, the state of the entire Hendrick Motorsports driver lineup has to be laid out car by car, because the missing piece becomes obvious through elimination. Start with the number 5 Chevrolet. Kyle Larson is in the middle of a long-term agreement that ties him to that car through the 2031 season. There is no ambiguity there and no expiration date worth discussing for years. Move to the number 24 Chevrolet. William Byron signed a 4-year extension in May 2025, an agreement that followed his second consecutive Daytona 500 victory. That seat is settled well into the future. Then there is the number 48 Chevrolet. Alex Bowman is on a 1-year extension covering the 2027 season, after which he retires from full-time competition. Hendrick Motorsports did not leave that seat open to speculation. Connor Zilisch has already been signed to take over the number 48 Ali Camaro beginning with the 2028 NASCAR Cup Series season, moving over from Trackhouse Racing. A succession plan was announced years before the seat actually changes hands. That leaves the number 9 Chevrolet. Chase Elliott signed a 5-year extension before the 2022 season began, an agreement that tied him to that car through 2027. His contract expires at the end of the 2027 season. It is the only unresolved seat in the organization. So the picture is this: 3 seats settled long-term, 1 succession plan already announced and locked in, and the most popular driver in the sport sitting as the single loose end in the lineup. That is the context Jeff Gordon was operating in when the question came to him. Gordon appeared on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio as part of a media push following the Connor Zilisch signing. That announcement was the reason for the appearance, but the conversation did not stay there. The Chase Elliott contract question was brought up, and Gordon answered it directly. Here is the full response. Gordon said, "As far as we're concerned at Hendrick, we want him to be one of those guys that drives at Hendrick forever." He continued, "We've had some conversations, but there's a lot of parts and pieces." Then he finished the thought, "From partners and discussions with Chase that will have to take place and need to get buttoned down. But we feel very confident." The surface reading of that is straightforward. Hendrick Motorsports wants Chase Elliott in that car for the remainder of his career. And there is no strategic reason for Gordon to say that publicly if it were not accurate. A team executive does not volunteer the word forever about a driver he is planning to replace. But the middle of that answer is the part worth slowing down on, because it contains information that the headline version leaves out entirely. The phrase to isolate is parts and pieces coming from partners. That is where the actual delay lives, and it is worth explaining exactly how that works in modern NASCAR because it is not intuitive. In the current era of the sport, a driver contract and a sponsorship contract are effectively the same negotiation. They are not separate tracks that happen to run alongside each other. Sponsors commit to defined windows of time. Drivers commit to defined windows of time. Those 2 sets of windows have to line up before anything can be finalized. The consequence of that is direct. A team can offer a driver any number of years it wants on paper. It can offer 5 years, 10 years, or an agreement that runs until retirement, but without guaranteed sponsorship revenue backing those specific years. The money has to be generated somewhere else. That means per share and other revenue streams carrying a load they were never designed to carry. At that point, the arithmetic behind the deal stops working regardless of how much both sides want it. So what Jeff Gordon was really describing is a calendar alignment problem across multiple companies. He was not describing a disagreement between a team and a driver over terms. He was describing a situation where several corporate partners need to commit to the same block of years before the driver contract can be built on top of them. There is a contrast inside Hendrick Motorsports itself that makes this concrete. Ally Financial was already locked in as primary sponsor on the number 48 through 2028, at a point when the driver situation for that car had not yet been fully settled. Sponsorship windows and driver windows do not automatically match up. One can be secured years ahead of the other in either direction. That mismatch is the entire mechanism Gordon was pointing at. To see why this matters so much specifically for Chase Elliott, the history of the number 9 sponsorship has to be understood, because it proves the point rather than simply asserting it. NAPA Auto Parts became Chase Elliott's primary sponsor in 2014. That relationship has run through the entirety of his rise in the sport. In July 2022, NAPA Auto Parts reached a multi-year contract extension with Hendrick Motorsports that continued its 26-race majority sponsorship of the number 9 Chevrolet Camaro. The renewal was announced in Las Vegas during the general session of the 2022 NAPA Expo, an event described as attracting more than 13,000 vendors, employees, store owners, and NAPA Auto Care Center professionals. The people who delivered that announcement tell you how significant it was internally. Hendrick Motorsports owner Rick Hendrick and team vice chairman Jeff Gordon joined Marty Walsh, NAPA Auto Parts vice president of marketing, on stage at the Venetian Convention and Expo Center to share the news. Marty Walsh framed the extension this way at the time: "We could not be more excited to extend our relationship with Hendrick Motorsports and Chase Elliott, especially in a year when we are reigniting our brand to meet the demands of the future." Chase Elliott's own response to that renewal is the line that matters most for this story. He said, "None of this is possible without NAPA." He added, "I'm so thankful for their commitment to our team and their passion for what we do every weekend." Rick Hendrick also spoke on the partnership at that announcement, saying, "We take immense pride in our association with NAPA. Put those pieces together and the payoff becomes explicit. An extension for Chase Elliott is not two parties reaching an agreement. It is a driver, a race team, and a set of corporate partners all agreeing on the same window of time. That is a fundamentally slower process than a two-party negotiation, and it is exactly what Jeff Gordon described when he said parts and pieces from partners need to get buttoned down. That is the first detail buried in his answer. There is a second one, and this one Gordon volunteered without being pressed for it. Continuing on the subject of the timetable, Gordon said, "And listen, when we talk about a Chase Elliott, he's like a franchise guy." He went on, "So yeah, the conversations usually happen a little earlier with someone like that, but we do have time." He closed with the deadline itself. It's not until the end of next year. Break down what is actually contained in that statement. Gordon classified Chase Elliott as a franchise driver. He then stated that conversations with a driver of that classification normally begin earlier than they have in this case. He then reassured everyone that there is still sufficient time remaining. What that amounts to is a NASCAR Hall of Fame driver and the vice chairman of the organization publicly acknowledging that the team is behind its own normal schedule on its most important competitive asset. That is not an accusation from the outside. That is the standard the organization applies to itself, described by the person who applies it. Nobody forced that admission. The question was about the contract status and the timetable. The observation that these conversations usually happen earlier with a driver of this standing was added on top of the answer. It also has to be balanced honestly. The end of the 2027 season is genuinely a long way off. Gordon said so directly, and he is not wrong about that. There is a full season of competition between now and the point where this becomes urgent. Being later than usual is not the same thing as being late. Beyond the timetable, there are several concrete reasons why the outcome here is almost certainly a new agreement with Hendrick Motorsports. Chase Elliott has been a Hendrick Motorsports driver for his entire top-level career. He has competed full-time in the NASCAR Cup Series since 2016, which makes him the organization's longest-tenured driver. He previously drove the number 24 Chevrolet before a number change after the 2017 season, when William Byron took over the number 24 and Chase Elliott moved to the number 9 beginning in 2018. The career URSUM supports the franchise driver description. Chase Elliott has earned 2 NASCAR National Series championships, the Xfinity Series title in 2014, and the NASCAR Cup Series championship in 2020. Fans voted him the sport's most popular driver for 4 consecutive years from 2018 through 2021. His entire full-time NASCAR Cup Series career has been run with the same crew chief, Alan Gustafson. The organizational history matters just as much. Hendrick Motorsports has been extremely reluctant to change drivers. The organization has not made a driver change since Jimmie Johnson retired from full-time competition after the 2020 season. At that point, Alex Bowman moved from the number 88 Chevrolet to the number 48 Chevrolet, and Hendrick Motorsports relinquished the number 88 to bring back the number 5 Chevrolet for Kyle Larson, who was technically Jimmie Johnson's replacement. That is one change in the space of several seasons. Recent competitive form supports his value to the organization as well. Chase Elliott entered the Dollar Tree 301 at New Hampshire Motor Speedway ranked number 6 in the playoff standings with 2 races remaining in the regular portion of the schedule. He was the highest-ranked Hendrick Motorsports driver in those standings and the top Chevrolet driver. So the realistic risk in this situation is not Chase Elliott leaving the organization. The realistic risk is the deal taking longer than it should and speculation filling the empty space for a full year in the meantime. There is one scenario worth keeping in the back of your mind, and it needs to be framed clearly as a scenario rather than a prediction. The setup is this. A driver enters a contract year while his organization is working through a difficult competitive stretch. A long-term extension means committing to whatever that organization becomes over the length of the agreement, not what it was when the previous contract was signed. The leadership response to that has been consistent and public. Jeff Gordon and Rick Hendrick have both stated that they expect the competitive situation to be corrected. Chase Elliott has said the same. Alongside that, outside speculation already exists among fans, and it should be labeled as exactly that. The theory circulating is that Chase Elliott could eventually join Trackhouse Racing as a driver owner, buying into the organization and its 3 charters at an age of 32 when his current contract expires. The reasoning offered is that a driver of his standing could negotiate terms that a large organization can match on money, but cannot match on ownership equity. The reason that theory exists at all comes down to seat availability. Hendrick Motorsports has another young talent in Corey Day developing behind a lineup where Kyle Larson is signed through 2031, William Byron is signed into the 2030s, and Connor Zilisch arrives in 2028. The seats are full. That said, it should be deflated immediately. This is fan theory rather than reporting. Nothing in the available material connects Chase Elliott to any other organization, and no team executive has suggested it. Returning to what the interview actually established, there are 2 findings worth stating cleanly. The complication is sponsorship alignment rather than desire on either side, and by the organization's own stated standard. These conversations began later than they normally would for a driver of this classification. Hendrick Motorsports also deserves credit here, because the broader pattern is unusually disciplined. This is an organization of long-term planners. That is why Alex Bowman's retirement was announced this far in advance rather than left to speculation. And it is why Connor Zilisch was locked into the number 48 years before he actually takes the seat. Contracts with sponsors and contracts with drivers are treated as a single long-range planning exercise, which is precisely why the partner alignment issue slows things down. Which brings it back to the one open item. Every other seat in the building has an answer attached to it. The one contract Hendrick Motorsports has not finished is the one that matters most to the fan base. And the clock on it runs to the end of the 2027 season. If this breakdown was useful, subscribe to the channel for continued coverage of the Chase Elliott contract situation. Drop a comment telling us whether you think the delay is purely a sponsorship timing issue or something more.